The wind moved differently that evening, slower than usual, like it was holding its breath. Two little girls, T and Shar, lived just around the block from each other, and everyone in the neighborhood had come to know their laughter, bright and endless. But tonight, their laughter was quiet, cautious, because the woods behind their homes whispered a promise they couldn't resist. It had begun innocently enough. T's mother had called her in for dinner hours earlier, but she and Shar had stayed, lingering in the fading sunlight, chasing shadows that stretched long and thin across the sidewalks. The houses were silent now, the windows glowing faintly with warm lamplight, and beyond those houses, the edge of the forest seemed to breathe. "I bet you're scared," Shar said, a small grin tugging at her lips, though her eyes darted nervously to the dark shapes between the trees. "I'm not scared," T said, though her voice was quieter than usual. "We just haven't been that far back before." That's all. They stepped off the familiar path, boots crunching leaves that had begun to turn amber and gold. The deeper they went, the cooler the air became, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Twigs snapped underfoot, sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet. Each rustle of branches overhead made the girls freeze, hearts thumping, and then continue, telling themselves it was just the wind. But the forest seemed alive in a way they couldn't explain, as if every shadow had a story to tell. At first, they wandered slowly, exploring familiar landmarks. The hollowed-out oak that T always insisted looked like it was winking. The fallen log that Char swore looked like a sleeping giant. But the woods beyond the first bend were darker, denser, almost silent except for the occasional whisper of the wind through the pines. "Do you think anyone comes back here after dark?" Char asked, her voice trembling just slightly. T shook her head. "Not anyone we know. Maybe animals. But that's it." They rounded a curve, and there it was, a small clearing, moonlight filtering through the canopy above, lighting the ground in a pale silver glow. They stepped into the center, feeling the shift in the air. It was colder here, and the shadows seemed to linger longer than they should. For a moment, they just stood, listening. A distant owl hooted, a slow, hollow sound that echoed as though the trees themselves were answering it. Then, Char noticed something on the ground. Letters, carved into the bark of a half-fallen tree, faint, jagged lines that spelled words neither girl fully understood. They crouched closer, tracing the letters with their fingertips. "Someone's been here before us," Char whispered. T nodded slowly, a shiver running down her spine. "Yeah, but who? And why?" They didn't wait for answers. The forest didn't seem eager to provide them. Instead, they moved on, stepping carefully over roots that twisted like sleeping serpents across the forest floor. Every small sound, the snap of a twig, the flutter of a bird, felt amplified. The girls held hands tightly, the simple touch grounding them as the forest seemed to grow around them, closing in. As they reached a small stream, T stopped. The water flowed quietly, silver in the moonlight, reflecting the swaying branches above. She leaned closer, peering at her own reflection, and then Char's. For a fleeting moment, the stream seemed deeper than it was, as if it had swallowed some secret from the woods and was keeping it. "Do you ever think the forest watches us?" Char asked, her voice barely audible. T hesitated. "Sometimes, but maybe it's just alive. Not in a scary way, just aware." They spent what felt like hours moving along the stream, hopping over stones and fallen branches, listening to the gentle gurgle of the water. Then a sound caught their attention, a faint crunching behind them, off the main path. They froze, the sound breaking the rhythm of the night. "It's probably just a rabbit," T said. But even as she said it, her voice lacked conviction. The noise came again, slower this time, deliberate. Char's grip tightened around T's hand. They turned slowly, scanning the darkness between the trees. Nothing moved, yet the feeling of being observed lingered. It was subtle, a presence rather than a shape, something just out of reach. I don't like this," Char said, her small voice trembling. "Me neither," T admitted. But still, they didn't run. There was a thrill here, a strange courage that only children possess when fear is woven with curiosity. Further along, they discovered a patch of mushrooms growing in a perfect circle. The moonlight glinted off the wet caps, making them seem almost otherworldly. Char whispered that it must be a fairy circle, and T laughed softly, though a part of her wondered if the woods might somehow make that true. They imagined tiny creatures hiding just beyond the brush, watching them with invisible eyes. The thought made them giggle, even as a CE